tonight. So there we go. And with that, welcome to the Big Top, folks. I'm Steve Boyce. It's Wednesday, January 31st. It's the end of the first month already. Shaking my head. SMH, unbelievable. But we're gonna help wrap up January in a blockbuster way tonight. We have a super special guest. Of course, all our guests are special. We don't mean to classify people in groups. It's not what we're about. But we're very excited to have Talia Mashiach. Almost got it. We'll get that later. It's a tough name to pronounce, but so rich with meaning. And we're gonna share a little bit of the culture later, and we're gonna introduce Talia more formally after we go through our opening community and crowd segment. We launched this a couple weeks ago, folks. Want to use kind of the first 15 minutes of the program to touch on a couple of projects that are going on within the community, see what folks are up to, hear a couple of noteworthy announcements and so forth, because we care about all of you, and you're all doing such great work. We want to make sure that we acknowledge that and recognize that and share opportunities, right? So that if you need help or if folks are interested in getting involved, we can help facilitate that. So Todd, with that, why don't you help us open our community and crowd segment tonight with some deep thoughts from that ever-working brain of yours?
I guess probably what's probably most relevant right now is the big UBM Informa mega deal that went down yesterday, right? You have two independent organizers, both of which are in the business of convening people first, trying to figure out community building things. I was thinking about it earlier, and I posted on our Facebook page, this problem that most of these event teams are running, their portfolios to minimize risk, right? And not maximizing freedom and speed and things of which are necessary today. Data and information is hoarded, right, and not shared. Is that going to happen even more so now with this mega deal? Maybe. Are the designs of these event teams going to get out of this vestige of an era when expensive failure was kind of the MO of the day, and deliberation was a virtue? Is that going to continue with this mega deal? And is the decision making with those two large scale organizers going to go even deeper into those smoky rooms? Is the power going to lie in even less of the few, right? So more problems in the industry, or is it a deal just for the course shareholders? It's going to be an interesting M&A activity to watch.
Well, absolutely, Todd. And those were actually pretty profound opening comments. If you just pulled that off on the fly, that was really impressive. So
thank you.
We know you're deeply informed on these issues. I think we brought that merger up, that announcement a couple of weeks back. Has there been any substantive change? Has that been approved? Is it going through?
It was approved yesterday.
By both boards? All right. Is that facing any antitrust scrutiny?
I don't know how the UK works. Don't know. Good question.
Are there Brexit implications on this deal? EU, the UK, it's an alphabet soup of regulation as far as I'm concerned. All right, maybe a topic for another community and crowd. I'm gonna give 2 minutes, so if anybody's got an insightful thought or comment on this big deal. I mean, I think the outcome remains to be seen, but it's one of these, the earth moves a little, right? When these big giants come together. Anyone want to take 90 seconds on that? No takers. Talia, you can't answer until we introduce you.
Let me tee up Talia, because it's these large M&A deals are mostly financial and efficiency driven, right? Almost kind of private equity backed, if you will. Get into it tonight with Talia, obviously, and super excited to have her tonight. But they're pretending that they're going to take $86 million of cost out of the business next year once the deal is approved. So, that's an efficiency and financial driven conversation. So we shall see.
Indeed.
I think they need Talia's software.
hold your thoughts, Talia, on that, because if I can't let Todd ruin the flow and have you comment before we've given you a grand introduction, which we've been working on all week. We had fireworks and everything, but we didn't have the amperage to actually set them off. So we'll save that for another day. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up our community and crowd segment early, because I think we really owe it to our community and our special guest and ourselves, just selfishly, to really maximize our time together. I will just note, though, because we got a great group here tonight, we do intend to make that community and crowd segment a little more formal. And as some of you have enjoyed, right, my 90-minute round robins, which are, it's a great gab fest, right, but perhaps not the best use of everybody's time. So what we decided to do was dedicate 15 minutes in front of every show. And we hope over time, as people get excited and want to share news, maybe you'll Slack us, right? Let me know in Slack, hey, Steve, I'd love to take 5 minutes out of your community and crowd segment, and we'll use the time that way. People like that, nodding of heads. If it's too complicated, you can shake. You can just stare at me. Hand gestures are not allowed. Okay signs are, I guess. All right, we got some thumbs up. Todd, I think we'll consider that the yays have outdone the nays, and we'll take it from there. But at least for tonight, let's go ahead and move forward, because we got a lot of ground to cover, folks. And Todd, I don't know if you shared the document, the abstract, in Slack or not. We can make this available for folks maybe after the show. There's a lot of detail in Talia's background that I think it's worth learning about, and we'll ask Talia to cover some of that, because I think it's important foundational and context, right, for her current project, Evid, which we're going to spend a good deal of time talking about tonight. So let's go ahead and get to this. I'd like to, again, introduce and welcome under the big top Talia Mashiach, who is CEO, founder, and product architect of Evid, which is really blazing a trail in a whole new category in our industry. We'll talk about spend management and what that includes and what that means and why that's so critical for Talia's clients and customers. She and I share a background from Chicago, which is, of course, near and dear to my heart, as folks know, even though I'm down here in Dixie now. So we'll get her thoughts on the second city as well. In and among building a very fast-growing business that's been very well-funded, and we'll talk a little bit about that. She also finds time to do a whole bunch of side projects, giving back to the community. A lot of stuff to get into there, which hopefully, Talia, you can pepper through our conversation tonight, as well as managing a family, including 5 kids. So with that introduction, Talia Mashiach, welcome to the Big Top. It's great to have you join us tonight.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here.
We are super glad to have you join us. Now, in our spotlight section here, we want to just kind of cover, as we've been doing of late, just kind of lay some of the basics here. So, Talia, maybe just first a couple of sentences. I, of course, never do our guests justice with my awkward introductions, but anything you'd like to fill in the gaps, they're about your, growing up in Chicago, if that's in fact true. I know you're there now, but anything about your family, about your background that led to the development of Evid. Let's touch on a couple of those foundational pieces if you want to share with us.
Sure. I think it's always interesting for people. They ask, how does a technologist wind up in the meeting and event industry? And we have a real passion for it. And I think I've shared with a number of people that I do have a passion for human connection, and I really believe that meetings and events is the best way you can connect. The way I was introduced into the industry, my husband was a musician way back and would do a lot of events. And I've always been real passionate about business and business process. And when he asked me to help him expand his business, I started to look at meetings and events, and I was just fascinated by the business side of it, and saw a big opportunity for some transformation there. And that was my entryway in.
Fantastic. It's interesting how everyone's entry story into the industry is always so unique, right? And usually is tied up in some form of passion or In my case, I sort of backed into it, right? Having worked at a software company serving the industry and sort of wasn't expecting it and fell in love. Great segue for you into the business. Now, you spent some time building a business around producing events, and that grew pretty rapidly. So you're sort of early, as we would say in our ring system, right? You were an organizer, putting together and producing events and assembling all the pieces and parts. What did you learn from that experience, Talia, that helps you in building Evid today?
I saw the opportunity from going with my husband to a meeting at the Hilton Chicago and asking to be able to refer more business for the band. And the director of catering there said, hey, we've got all these clients that come to the hotels, and they ask the hotel to get all these auxiliary services. It's not our sweet spot. Would love to be able to solve it. And so what I saw was these large corporations and the way they were purchasing and paying, and I was just fascinated by the spreadsheets and the opportunity and there's the disconnect there. And so I didn't know enough about events, although my major was in marketing, and I knew at the time how powerful live events are from a marketing perspective. And so I actually launched my own event company and built the software to manage the spend as a business owner. And I knew the key for my event planners was that they needed to focus as much time on building experiences. And I wanted to hire people that were amazing at building experiences and didn't necessarily have to know everything about financial process and math and processing invoices. But that's the core of the job. So if technology could automate that process for my event creators, and I as an owner could get the visibility into what we were doing and really impact strategy, we could really build a great business, and I could really understand the meeting and event business from the ground up. And so we built the company from scratch. I knew nothing about the industry, and 8 years later, I think I know way more, including being on the ground and literally holding signs at an airport for VIPs when we had to fill in, and really saw how the software was huge in terms of impacting our ability to grow. We grew into a really successful, fast growth company within a very short time. Until I saw the opportunity to sell it, the services side, and take the IP with me and bring everything I had learned and discovered over that time period to the market.
It's a fascinating journey, and I love how you describe it. I could see people's faces light up, right? We have to be Janes and Jacks of all trades, when you're putting these events together, because Francesca and others are nodding. I can even see the people on the phone nodding. That's how strong your power is coming through. Whatever needs to be done, right? In a sense, it's show business. Show's got to go on. Whatever needs to be done has to get done. And so, these people wind up having to develop skills, like you suggested, in areas that aren't core to being an experienced or journey designer, right? Suddenly they're having to navigate financial operations, through rudimentary spreadsheets. So a huge gain in efficiency, but also in helping to enable people to do the work they really love to do. I mean, you must have seen that transformation as people were suddenly unburdened, right, of some of this basic stuff that really isn't in the job description.
Oh, absolutely. I was able to also attract some of the best experience builders, because they were so excited about not having to, to have their budgets that were automated. When, an invoice was processed, they could, they didn't have to track it on a spreadsheet. And they really were, I would tell you, I think the metric was we had about 50,000 invoices as a company when we were kind of my last year there that we were processing. And I had one person in finance part-time. And my teams, my event team spent maybe 3% of their time. So just to tell you what a heavy lift software can do in automating that process. And that's the reason we were able to grow. My team was so hands-on, able to create great experiences for the customer. And instead of worrying about if they paid their supplier or if their budget was over and all those other things that are really important. So it's fun.
No, that is fun, but and we're going to get to some of the more basic details of outlining, what the platform does, right? I want to make sure that you help folks understand me mostly, what spend management is all about. Because as my wife will tell any of you, I'm no good at spend management. Not good at much management of anything. Although sometimes I can herd cats pretty well, so that's kind of amazing. But here's what's interesting. You've clearly seen how powerful technology is as a lever in the business. It didn't seem like you set out to become a technology entrepreneur, but at some point, right, that switch went off. What did it for you to finally say, this is a bigger opportunity, or I want to direct all of my passion into the development of this platform versus just using it as back of the house technology to power, the services business that you had created? What was the tipping point for you, Talia?
So I have a marketing background, and the power of the channel, right? Just really believing, and this was back in 2004. I launched the original service company. So a lot has changed since then, but I saw it even at that time that, I kind of predicted around the power of this channel. And I love business process. So, marketing, business process, human connections, right? Bring it all together in this category. And I love a challenge. So, talk about a challenge of how to evangelize, a category. So all those things. And I really always, what I love about technology is around being able to automate a process and make things better and solve problems and use software to be able to do it. So we free up ourselves to spend our time on things that software can't do, which is really powerful. So that's what I really love. I think I always loved the technology part of it. I went in and built the business and built the technology for our own company. And I enjoyed the industry, but I really saw the power if I could take what I built and proved out in my own event company and bring that to everybody else, how transformative this could be and how we could really change the industry. I believe the key piece that we're missing are more tools that allow us to keep transforming.
So let's go there and focus on that theme of change. The sort of the basic layout, the pre and post, right, of your capability to being developed and converted into software was people used to manage this stuff on scraps of paper and Excel sheets, and now they've got a platform and a system to do that. So that's massive change, right? I guess my first question would be, aren't there already systems in the marketplace that do financial management, tracking invoices, generating invoices, making payments, right? I would assume that software has been around for a while. How is Evid different, and why did you see a market opening, even in something where the feature set's probably fairly mature in other areas, if I'm right on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I asked the same question when I was looking at back in 2004. I didn't understand why they were kind of master billing or sending your credit card when companies have systems like Oracle and SAP and these huge, big systems. And what I learned, and it's not different than some other categories, is that those big systems work really well for inventory purchasing, things with SKUs. But when it comes to services, outside the box nuances like one-off deposit payments, lots of suppliers, those systems really don't work. And they're a box that doesn't bend. And therefore, companies have had to go off of those traditional systems. And it's similar to contingent labor, which is temp staffing about 15 years ago, very similar, and solutions were built to help that particular category. And so what we've seen with meetings and events, and I'm sure people experience it, is that if you're going to get a PO from a company, it's usually a difficult process, and a lot of people have tried to work around their systems. And when you're not processing your invoices and payments through a centralized system, what's happened is that the work has pushed onto the user, which in this case are a lot of the event creators, and you lose all your data because everyone's managing it in spreadsheets and credit cards and pass through and all kinds of things are going on. And so what we really need to do is bring back a centralized system and work the same way as you mentioned that those systems, SAP and Oracle, work for those big categories, those other categories. We got to help to make it work for this category, but there are unique workflow and nuances. And so we've built it's a purpose-built solution, really specifically understanding the unique workflow of the meetings and events. And that's where it's unique and why it solves for this problem.
Well put, and I love that phrase, purpose-built. I think the workflows are unique in our industry, and it's interesting, don't necessarily hear it positioned that way very often. Maybe some folks do on the call. I don't think of it in those terms. That may just be a new phrase to me, but I like that. feels configurable when you talk about workflows, right, and these different components. So so give us a broad stroke, Talia, if you could. What are some of the key kind of things that the software does for, I assume your key clients are typically organizers, right? Event producers, is that accurate?
Yeah, our largest customers, we work with the large Fortune 100 companies and their teams, right? So Dell and Apple, Eli Lilly, pharma, tech, both big industries that have a lot of spend. And for them, I mean, I think the financial process is not very efficient and it's difficult, and therefore what we do is come in and help to automate that financial process, which in essence is really helping to have a system that processes invoices and makes payments. And as a result of processing the invoices and payments through our platform, which connects into front-end tools of all the sales and marketing tools and meetings tools on one end, and connects also in the back end into an SAP, Oracle, big financial system. So we bridge that. As a result of processing that, we're able to produce all the data, right? All the spend and the analytics and the management around it. So that's kind of the real core, and make that process so much easier and faster for an event producer. Like just, submit my invoice and I don't need to worry about it anymore, as opposed to all the additional work they typically have to do. So life is a lot easier.
Taking friction out of any kind of transaction, especially when money is involved, right, is always a good value driver. Tell us, define spend for us. When you say spend, and you're kind of positioning your platform to be a spend management platform, and correct me if my words are not accurate, but what does spend mean? What does it include? And for Fortune 100 brands or companies, right, what kind of numbers are we talking about? What are the ranges of their spend, so we can get a sense of the scale of this activity?
Yeah, spend is anything they're spending on for any services, goods and services, right? It's the total amount of cost for a company. So when they think about the spend for meetings and events, it's all of the budgets in aggregate of what they're spending. We find in tech companies, this could be upwards of 500 million that are being spent on meetings and events. In the pharmaceutical companies, easily 300 million to even one company has $1 billion in spend.
Wow.
And so if you think about that, for these companies to have so much money that they're spending on this really critical channel, and not to have the visibility into it, to not have like a efficient process around managing it, and also to not have the financial controls that they typically would have of some spend in other areas that's that large, is a really big gap for them. And so we're trying to solve that, and that's kind of the company side of it. And on the event, experience builder, that's really around like, man, they want to be compliant with their companies. They want to make sure there's no budget surprises. They want to make sure they're doing everything right, and to do that sometimes is very complicated. And so how can we make that easier for them so that they can create better events? And so ultimately, it's about maximizing the budgets that companies have to create the best possible events. And we think about it as ROE, return on event, right? So you've got the denominator and you've got the numerator. So we're the numerator in the equation. How much are we spending? And there's lots of really great technology out there now, and that's all about, well, what's the return, right? Did we hit the business objectives? Did we hit the sales? And that's the denominator. And combined, we've got this great measurement that will help our industry grow.
Oh, it's tremendous. We, as Todd will remind me, we could spend all night in the spotlight section just learning about all the nuances of your business. I will rely, as I always do, on the better brains and smarter minds and more creative thinkers in the group here to flesh out the details, Talia, that I wasn't adequate in getting out. Before we wrap up the spotlight here in a minute and move into some of these deeper topics that I know we're eager to get to, how do you guys make money? Is this a classic SaaS type of model? Are there additional services around that? Or tell us how you guys make money. What's the business model?
We do have a license fee for the software. And in addition, we are also a payment processor. So the payments are integrated within our solution. And so similar to credit card, when a supplier receives payment and have a merchant account and there's a small transaction fee, we have that similar model. So it's a combination of both.
Care to share which bucket is larger?
Well, I think it's a good question, because what our goal is to align with the company that, the more spend they have on the platform, the better it is for everyone. So often a license fee goes up when you have more users or more spend, and that may not be in the best interest of the company. So we've really aligned it so that the more spend, the better for us and the better for them.
I love that you talk about alignment, and I can't help but I want to sneak one last question in here, because I didn't really spend much time talking about some of the key stakeholders that help make the business more successful. But my guess is procurement teams at these Fortune 100 companies, they must love your software. They must absolutely love the outcomes that they get. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, I think, for a long time, the C-suite has been blind to this category, which we could talk about with some of the challenges that's created for us. And I think we're the tool that enables procurement and finance to actually be able to see and bring their expertise to the table to really be able to help. So procurement is definitely big. Some of our clients have told us that for the CPO, they were asked where some of the largest opportunities were. And in the top 3, the meetings and events category is one of the largest ones for them that they see opportunities to really transform. So that's pretty big. Finance lands in it because they appreciate being able to have the additional financial control. And of course, the marketing side is really big.
Fantastic. So Talia, thank you for the grilling. That's the grilling portion of the show, where Steve grills you with nonstop interrogative questions to fill in the gaps in my understanding of the business. Folks, hopefully that lays at least a little of the basics. We're going to spend the next hour with Talia now, kind of diving into some bigger strategic topics, because I think, first of all, that's really where we want to spend our time. But folks, don't hesitate to come back to some specific nuggets, right? If you've got questions about the core business. Talia, as we move into our deeper conversation, I wanted to thank you again for your time in prep with us for the show, because you've had some rapid growth at Evid. And Todd, we should make sure we get the links to the site. I want to make sure everybody can link through and see all the great material that's on the web property, and go through the lead funnel and all that good stuff, right? Get the white papers. A lot of people worked really hard on those, so you want to get those. And the case studies are gold. We're going to touch on some of those. But you've got a marketing background, right? And you've touched on this at several points. Although the software ostensibly focuses on sort of the spend and the financial equation here, maximizing budget, right, to free up resources for making a better, more successful event really is the outcome of the software. And so it strikes me that you brought that marketing mentality to the creation of the technology. Do you work with CMOs at these companies closely? Do they understand the power of what you're doing? And is that helping them further appreciate the value of live experiences within their marketing mix?
Yeah, I think it's really just starting to hit the CMOs that really there's an opportunity to measure in this category, right? And to measure live events. I think that's very new still. The numerator side is maybe a little bit easier because we're able to share that, but they're still, I think, kind of working on the denominator, right? Their technology on that side still needs to mature. I would say at Dell, which is one of our early customers, they've done a really nice job, and they've been out there kind of talking about what they've done over the last couple of years in terms of being able to kind of put some analytics around and being able to deliver that back to the business. I think we're going to start to see that more in the next 2 to 3 years, and it's really about getting in front of them and saying, this is possible now because it was never possible before.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, I know awareness, right, and preaching the gospel, not to get, we're non-denominational here, but we do appreciate faiths of all kinds. That's going to be a big part of your role in 2018, from what I understand. You've had some great success with the company, hired some key roles. Don't know if you want to share any of that, if it's germane. Some of your folks may be on the call here tonight, or maybe working too hard back at the office to get out to share the time with us. But with making some of those key hires, your role is going to change a little bit. Share with folks what that's about in terms of your new focus in 2018 on thought leadership and getting out there with these very strategic messages about what's possible now in the C-suite.
Yeah, I think that if we want to be able to continue to grow the demand side for us in terms of putting dollars towards live events versus other marketing channels, we really need to up our game and being able to provide the data back to the C-suite that they use and the business, budget owners to analyze where they should put their marketing dollars. And so, that's a big piece of what we're trying to be out there and to solve. And in doing that, then you've really got the attention of the C-suite to say, hey, this is an area and this is a category that's really important. We've got to kind of get our arms around it and see how we can maximize the opportunities here. And for procurement organizations, that always starts with, what are we spending? Who are we spending it with? What are we spending it on? And so to know that there's actually tools now out there to be able to get at that is a big part of what we need to talk about. And there are not a lot of voices out there, being able to share that. We're really one of the few in the category that are doing that. So kind of that, getting that group together, getting more people to be talking about what's finally possible is a big part of what I'm doing.
It's tremendous. And it seems like it's a necessary conversation to enable that strategic stance that you've taken, which I applaud and I think is a great one, which you've come out and shared with us that you think experiential marketing is the most important part of the marketing mix. Did we catch that right? Is that part of your stance? And is it necessary to prove, right, the financial efficacy of events to be able to make that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you have my conversations with CMOs or marketers is, you guys can see the power of when you get together, when you do these conferences, when you meet people, how powerful that is to achieve your business objectives. And everyone will kind of say, yeah, because they have a feeling and they kind of know it. But until you can prove it with data, you're not going to be able to make the impact in these organizations. And I really can see how, as like looking into 2 or 3 years, and I say this really boldly, that, the transformation of, what's happened in the internet and what's happened in all kinds of big things, that really live events and the power to connect with your customer, on a personal level is going to be so critical and going to be something that all companies are going to try and grab it, and they're going to suddenly realize, wow, we got to go do that. And in order to get there, they're going to need to know that data, and they're going to need to be able to optimize it. So that's coming. And I've kind of said I've literally picked up a pen and said to a CPO, you know exactly how much you're spending on every single pen and how many you use every single week. But you have a $500 million category that it is today your most critical and will continue to be in the next, 2 to 3 years. And you have no idea what you're spending on it, and you can't be strategic around it. That's not acceptable. That shouldn't be acceptable.
Now, how do they respond to that kind of challenge?
They're like, they said, you're right. Yeah, they're like, you're right. But we don't have the tools to be able to manage it in the same way. And we've kind of been told by the industry, and this is, I think, something where we heard ourselves, is you guys don't know about us, to leave us alone. We're kind of unique. Let us do our thing and don't worry about it. And that's, I think, hurt us in the long run, because now we don't have the data that allows them to look at our channel the same way they look at the other channels, and we lose out. And so I think we've got to shift that position and want to be connected with the C-suite and want to be strategically managed in the same way that they might manage print and they might manage digital and all those other areas.
I think that's a really amazing perspective, Talia. Just the notion that by being sort of the redheaded stepchild off to the side, no offense to redhead, we love you, we've done ourselves a disservice over time, right? We're sort of, they kick the phrase around my agency, live events don't have a seat at the table, right? It's not necessarily viewed as a peer in the marketing mix with digital channels, social channels, where data is not only ubiquitous, but often ludicrous. I mean, some of these reach numbers in social media, what does it even mean? I reach 20 trillion people. It's like, Okay. Nevertheless, so this is really interesting. What are the C-suite folks? So we get the procurement side, right? Because you're an enabling force for them. It's a tool they can use to tighten the ship, right, and demonstrate, their effectiveness as managing company assets and so forth. What are the CMOs saying? What are the CEOs that you're talking to? If they're spending $300-500 up to $1 billion, I realize these are enormous global companies, but that's a large line item. So do they buy your argument that experiential marketing is in fact, the place to be?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things I would share is that often today, without the data, they're going to look and say, "Why we spent $500 million on this. Where should we not be spending? Should we be canceling events? Should we not be meeting?" Right? Because that's what they're saying. And can we reduce our cost by eliminating the number of events? And that's how I'm going to reduce the cost. And I came back to them and I said, what if I could show you that event that you were about to maybe save $100,000 on, but it brought the company $500,000 back in revenue? Would you want to cancel that? You'd be losing $400,000. And they're like, "Oh, you're right." I said, so that's our job, because unless we put the data in front of these companies, they're going to look at it. We got to save money. Let's just slash it. Right? And if we change that, we actually think that by providing them the data, they're going to actually choose to invest more dollars into this channel. And that's where we're at. And so when I speak with CMOs, that's what they're asking for.
How have you been able to connect and to understand the business impact, right, of events and help your customers see that? You mentioned on the back end in your ecosystem, you're connected to the SAPs and Oracles and so forth from a payment system financial perspective. Are you also hooked up to CRM systems? Is that how you're making the connection to sort of the value creation component?
Yeah, we connected into Salesforce. Like Dell, for example, uses Salesforce. They manage their campaigns. Cvent and Lanyon on the meeting side is a tool for event registration in which they're tracking. So we're connected in on that side. There's some other marketing tools that are out there. And so definitely you need both, right? But I would say that the starting point for these companies is, let me feel like I have my hands around this category and around the spend, and then I can start being strategic. You think about the role that procurement should be playing today for the business is to be able to show a mirror back to a business, P&L owner and say, you spent, $500,000 in events. Hey, you know what? You could take that $500,000 and we can give you value of, $600,000, right? Or something like that, because if you use preferred suppliers, if you choose to do it in a different location. So procurement is eager today to bring value to help maximize the budgets, create better events, and they can be really helpful. There's only so much an event creator can do. They can't, be running preferred supplier programs. They can't also be, figuring out what payment terms they're supposed to have. They just want to build events. So how do we enable through transparency the finance and procurement to really help to be able to support us to create those great events? You asked me another question before around who of the C-suite cares. I think the CFO would be another one, because they don't like what they can't see, and they make the assumptions that they shouldn't be spending it.
Right. Great point. Well, I really appreciate, Talia, the thoughtfulness that you've put behind the alignment equation, right? That some of the the financial savings become obvious when you start to tighten up your spend and do global strategic sourcing and have that transparency and visibility. Folks, I'll refer you to the deck that Todd posted, which Talia was great enough to share with us. There's some great case studies in there. Talia, I'm looking at the Dell one, 9.4 million cost savings in the first 12 months, right? Reduced outsourcing costs by 1.4 million. These are some big numbers. I mean, people, ROI is all the rage, right, in our industry. That's some instant ROI right there. And we're just talking about by tightening up the spend side. Didn't even get to some of your broader points, right, about how this enables growth in the business. So it seems like you've cracked that nut in terms of, exposing, right, through the data, the value of these experiences. Do you think that's going to lead to some pretty rapid growth in the industry, or what are your customers saying? Are they doubling down on investments? Are they adding more? Got a new tax plan in place that may help. $1,000 bonuses for everybody. What are your predictions 2-3 years out? Are we going to see some big growth in the industry?
I think we're going to see some big growth if we are up for the challenge. And there's two things we need to do. We really need to get tight on our data. We have to prioritize it. And we also need to stop telling the C-suite to leave us alone and that we're different. And we've got to really be able to look at ourselves from the processes and controls that companies would typically have on all their other marketing categories and all their other spend categories, and figure out how those help us and stop worrying that they're going to hurt us. And so that we're at the table and we bridge that gap. And I think, and really be willing to innovate and transform, be willing to move off of the way we've always done things with spreadsheets and binders, and be willing to use software and technology in the places that we can be helpful to get rid of the things that we don't like to do and don't need to do manually, so that we free ourselves up to really raise the bar on events. And I think AI is going to be incredibly powerful. I mean, I just think there's all kinds of stuff that's coming, and we don't want to be considered kind of the old school, channel. We want to be the latest and greatest, and there's just some awesome stuff out there. So I hope to be able to work with some great partners and over the next 2 or 3 years, and we're ready for it.
That's fantastic. I love that bring it on attitude, right? And I also love, and I think our crowd appreciates this as well, right? You've really put a challenge forth to the industry, Talia. We got to get tighter on our data. We got to get our data act together, right? And we spend a lot of airtime on this program chronicling that very challenge. I love that you've emphasized the second point, right? That we as an industry got to get engaged. Let's get at the table. Let's get involved. Stop saying we're different. Let it, open ourselves up to being measured, right, and compared, and let's put our own value creation against other marketing channels and opportunities, and put our money where our mouth is. I love that challenge. I want to pause here, folks. I've got a list of other topics to get through, but I'm conscious I haven't drawn anyone else into the conversation. I'm being selfish with our time with Talia. So let's open it up for a few minutes. Anybody want to push back on that challenge? Is Talia right? Do we need to get our data act together? And are we engaged enough? Are we at the table with the CMO and the CFO and the CEO? Do we need to stop hiding? Let's get some thoughts in here. Who wants to jump first? Eric, go.
I'll bite. Yeah, hi Talia. I'm really curious to know. You talked about the Dell was one of the first clients to really start wrapping their heads around the data and determine the value of events. And what was one of their starting points for figuring that out?
Well, I think like we talked about, it as an equation, right? So they implemented EVED, which allowed them to be able to get that numerator, and they really can understand their costs, not just for a 5-day program, but each of the individual events that they did, like a golf outing or a reception. And then they used some really great technology on the front end to measure the campaigns, especially for them when they have the user conferences, right? They were measuring, well, how much additional revenue was increased from particular clients after they maybe attended a specific event. And they were tying that all they followed that within Salesforce. And then they were able to do the ROE and doing some various different analytics on it. So it's pretty cool, very forward thinking. A guy by the name of Greg Schneider really led that initiative. And I would share that what was interesting at Dell is that in their event team, and that team is now turned over, but for 2 years, they actually took leaders that were never from events. They were completely from an outside marketing category, and they came into events and said, how do we apply what we've done in our other channels and bring it here? And I think that innovative thinking was really helpful for them.
Cool. And just to tag along, it's maybe probably maybe too far in the weeds, but how long is that campaign typically for an event? When they're and this is obviously from their being the organizer in this role. But, how long do they, view a campaign? Does it, everybody's going to be a little bit different, but is it, primarily 3-6 months after an event, a year?
I think that's a great question. One day we should bring in those guys who did it, right? And ask them. I think it really depended on what it was. And they looked at it in aggregate too. So I think there was kind of the immediate. So in the 30 days after they had an event, was there a spike, right? In the first quarter afterwards, did we hit them again and invite them to another event? So it was really, they really analyzed the various different touch points and were able to kind of come back and say, and the team there today, one of the North American leads, she told me that she's one of the best in the company at being able to come back and go back to the business and tell them how they've invested their dollars in events, that she can produce those results, and they're the #1 channel. So it's pretty neat. I've learned a lot about the process, but they would be a great guest on this.
Yeah, thank you.
Eric, let me throw a question your way, and in doing so, connect a dot for Talia. Talia, Eric is the founder of a company called Eventrio, which has built a platform of capabilities that also helps bring some transparency into data and spend. And Eric, as I also do with others, I didn't do justice to your mind company and your IP, but Eric, I'm curious if listening to Talia, does that resonate with you? Some of what she shared in terms of how that transparency once it's exposed, right, is so eye-opening for clients, and yet there is resistance in the industry, isn't there? Sometimes, amazingly, right, to actually wanting that kind of transparency. Any thoughts on just that general arc?
Yeah. I mean, transparency can be kind of a bad word, and with some people, it depends on, who you're actually sitting down and having that meeting with. But, Talia and I have actually had the chance to talk just a couple months ago. And, one of the things I know, she's told her story, but, how many dues have been paid on her end is very impressive. She went through a lot of the same things that Eventrio obviously is going through. Our objective with Eventrio was really synchronistic to what Evid is doing, but on the forward-facing side. So, when an event organizer is sourced the service contractor, the florist, the venues, hotels, it's about creating an Amazon-like marketplace so that exhibitors can point and click and schedule payments and authorize POs and collaborate on graphics with, a display house, for example, all in one place. So consolidating a 8-month process down to a matter of 15, 20 minutes in a lot of cases. So it was the same thing about creating a frictionless process so that the exhibitor or sponsor will be able to free up their time on the logistics and actually think about what they want to accomplish at these organizers' events. So, but we ran into the buzzsaw of the general service contractor, and the transparency is a dangerous word when you're talking to people that they make their nut on marking up other people's products and services. And so, it's really hard for a startup with, just under $1 million of funding to launch into a market with very established players who've done business, with generations of a lot of their clients. So.
Talia, any big roadblocks like that you run into, kind of akin to that general service contractor? I don't know if they've been a bugaboo at all in your growth arc with Evid. Any stakeholders that have proven particularly tricky in dealing with as you've grown your company that you're willing to share? Not by name, just general.
Yeah, I think, there's definitely a group of, I would say, more on the meeting side, where they're nervous about the transparency and very protective of the status quo. And that is very difficult. So there's kind of a group of those. So I'm always excited and inspired when I get to meet people who are on that side of it that want to be innovative and improve. So that's always great. So I think that's really challenging. And I would agree with Eric. I think sometimes you've got companies that have built a business around the fact that there isn't transparency in the market, that these companies don't have them when they're buying things. And unless they reinvent their business model, they're going to put up roadblocks because, we're going to force them to reinvent the way they do business because it's completely relied upon the fact that there is no transparency into what they're doing. And Eric experiences that there. We experience it with, certain agencies that, have really kind of take on from the company and they outsource everything to them. And they are able to tack on pass-through costs and, you know, other things. And so I get it. Like, I understand why there's pushback. But I always think that, you know, we need to evolve, and it's going to happen anyway, right? Like, just companies are not going to keep doing this.
Right.
And so let's be at the table and let's figure out how we provide more value and actually could create a more profitable business than trying to kind of stick with the model that we've always, you know, people have always had forever. So that's kind of where I run into it.
Hey, Talia, it's Francesca, and I just want to say I'm so excited to hear a like-minded person. But I've been, you know, for years I was the one, you know, trying to fight all that, the idea of trying to get to the table and getting the money, and, you know, the budgets are cut because you don't have the return information. Then we started putting in measurements. I was one of the early people who, like, you know, tried to get my company to really see this stuff, and they just kind of, oh, whatever, you know, kind of went through it. And then there were a lot of my peers had proprietary information, so they pulled data out, and we had a lot of different ways. But most of what we were doing was anecdotal. So, you know, it's like the CEO starts to slash something, and I'm like, wait, come and see it. And so when they saw it, put their eyes on it, they're like, oh, okay, now I get why you're doing it. But we had to go there as opposed to having the actual dollars. And then one time we, you know, you go to the CFO and say, hey, you know, I need some more money for stuff. And you know, try and pitch him on the money, and we have this whole deck and all the KPIs and everything all together and all ready for him. And he's like, look, I just funded this R&D group for multi-million dollars. You can have that little bit of money you need, no problem. And so it's almost like you get, on one hand, we got, you know, it's really not interested me, you know, you're nothing to me, and so we don't need you. And the other hand, it's like, it doesn't matter. It's actually you're fine. Do whatever you want to because you're over there. And so, you know, nothing really mattered. And I kept saying, we really need to actually get them to hear that we're viable. We're viable. We're important. We support sales. We bring in revenue because it might be secondary. It might be, you know, add-on revenue, but it's definitely, we bring it in because they've seen us. They've seen what the kind of quality, they've seen the way the salespeople can talk to these guys when they're at an event. Face-to-face is amazing. And I would go up in arms and get on my high horse. But really it boiled down to just what you said. We need to put on, you know, the business hat, get smart, get some statistics that they don't really understand until they see actual data that makes sense, data that, you know, transparency, actually, you know, here's why, and it all boils down to the dollar. You know, it's like you have to show that you've somehow or another brought something to the revenue stream. And so all that boils down to, I'm really excited about your program and what you're providing to people. And I hope that people will, you know, even those who have the proprietary information and proprietary systems, that they will see that, you know, this can be, you know, it seems to be a much broader, I don't know what you call it, but broader platform for what everybody's looking for. I mean, I spent so many hours on those spreadsheets and doing stuff, and we all worked. That's why we had 24/7 jobs, because it wasn't because we you know, the job itself wasn't so much. It was all the paperwork and the backup, and oh my gosh, the complaints from my team about what they had to submit and all the things, you know, all the decks we had to make to get something to just, here's the 5 things we do at the sales meet. We provide the sales meeting, the 5 little numbers at the sales meeting that, you know, a team of 45 actually put together for weeks, you know, and it just never made any sense to me. And it really boils down to because our company wouldn't allow us, or wouldn't give us the opportunity to build some sort of a data analytics system that actually made sense for our company. And now that there's something out there that you can actually, you know, throw your own stuff into, and guess what? It's a platform, everybody can use it. Yay. And I'm not that you're the only one, no offense there. You know, I know there's other things out there, but I'm seeing so much of it. And so the industry is going to have to now say, we can't say we don't have time anymore. We can't say, you know, it's all about the, you know, if there's a solution that can provide us something that isn't a spreadsheet system, and it can be wrapped into so many other things, you know, like the campaigns of Salesforce and so many other things, then you can't say it anymore. You have to just buck up, put on your business hat, and go and say, look, I can actually show you. I don't have to, you know, and I can be freer to do more creative and innovative thinking as well, which is what I got excited about in the end.
And hopefully, Francesca, thank you for that. And hopefully people would embrace that opportunity.
Mhm.
There is a persona in our industry that loves their spreadsheets.
I will just say one thing. I do have some colleagues who I work with that they're that whole, oh, I'm so busy and I just don't have time. And that whole mentality is a mentality of the no offense again, but the middle level exhibit manager and meeting manager. It is that mentality because they really don't know, they don't want to embrace technology. They either don't understand it or don't want to learn it because they're too busy and they're back in the old, sitting in their old traditions, or they're excited about new technology, but they're focusing on something like social media and some of these other things, and they're not paying attention to the back end analytics, which is what we need. So,
well, and Francesca, we've got and Talia, we haven't shared this with you. We have a loving term for those kind of folks, right? Who love their spreadsheets, don't want to give them up. These people aren't happy unless they're working 24 hours a day and complaining about it the entire time. The choiceless doer, right? These people sort of caught in these roles and they just sort of execute their annual cycle year in, year out, right? And perhaps their management team doesn't support innovation, or maybe they're afraid of it, right? Could be a lot of legitimate reasons. We don't mean to shame them with this phrase, but we found it to be apt. Let me turn that into a question, Talia. Any good software platform is going to drive a lot of change, right? How much change management have you found yourself doing with your customers? And is that an important ingredient for success for them?
That's such a great question, because what we actually wound up doing is launching last year a simplified version to be able to get started on. And so you think about what our system does is, in essence, instead of, when you get an invoice back from your supplier, instead of all the various different things you need to do to try and get it paid, whether you're sending a credit card or whether you say, hey, you know what, I'm going to give it to the agency and they're going to pay it all, right? And I'll wait to get a report back for them in terms of what I spent. You could just simply take 5 minutes and submit that invoice into our platform, and you're done, and you just watch on your dashboard to see when it got approved and when it got paid, because we're kind of doing the lifting and bringing it in. And that's all, right? So your process stays the same. You just wait for your invoices and you submit it. That's a really easy thing to be able to do. It brings a lot of value to the event creator right away. And it does start to give some visibility and financial controls to the company. So we kind of brought that in a start there, but ultimately where you kind of go, and what we had originally was really the full kind of change your process from emailing your suppliers as to what you want to order from them, and keeping the spreadsheet of your budget, and making sure when you make payments that you don't go over, and all of that other stuff, and kind of keeping that whole binder. That's really the full suite of what we've got. So the entire financial process, kind of companies call it procure to pay process, is automated as opposed to kept on spreadsheets and emails. And that does take a change. We've done in Apple, which has been really successful for us. The event managers actually now talk to other customers and other event teams about it. And they said, when we first were told about this, we said, wow, it was such a different mindset for us, because we're used to waiting all the way till the end and spending my weekend reconciling it, getting everything paid, and putting all my reports together. And now I'm really kind of, as I do my process, instead of kind of emailing in spreadsheets, I'm doing this in software. And we were really pushed back about it in the beginning because it felt like so much change. And now that we're used to it, wow, it's just a switch of how you're thinking about it. It's so much easier. We save so much time. When the event is over, we're done. So it does, the full suite does take not so much training, because it's not hard to do, but a big shift in the way you've done things for a long time. But the easier process to start with has definitely helped in making people feel comfortable. Oh, I can get this up in 60 days, save my time, and then I'll go to the next level.
Sort of a killer app like concept, right? Sorry, Francesca, like a killer app, right? Something very high value that all event creators or many need to do. You simplify that, get them started, help them get the change process moving, then adopting the rest of the platform's got to be that much easier. It's sort of a two-putt to use an
Definitely. And I think that, look, there are a lot of companies that use their agencies to pay, and many of maybe on the phone do that service. Today, even if as an agency, you're doing it manually, likely it's very probably it's real costly for you. So if you could, we do have partners and agencies that use our tool, and they continue to be able to provide that service to the customer, but they're doing it so much more effectively. And either one, they drive down the cost to their customer, or they're increasing their profitability and shifting, investment into elsewhere. So it kind of goes both ways depending on how the company's structured.
Well, I have to say, it's also a great perk to be able in the middle of the project, and you always are getting ask from either a executive manager or your own, somebody is always asking, where are we on the budget? Where are we at this moment? Can we afford to do XX? Guess what? The CEO just came up with this really great idea, and it's going to cost another, $50,000. Can you throw that in there? Whatever it is. And so to be able to actually pinpoint and say, I know exactly what I'm spending, and I'm, we're 3 weeks out, or 2 months out, or the other way, or whatever the way it is, I know exactly where my spend is. That's a big thing for someone like the exhibit manager to be able to say and know that they have a handle on it, as opposed to running back, let me check my spreadsheet and let me think, did those 5 invoices get in yet or not, and blah blah blah. So I think that's a huge benefit too, to again give the exhibit manager or the meeting manager the ability to be able to be in control of their own conversation, with their management.
And one better, in the way Apple configured our software, that meeting owners and budget owners actually have a dashboard that they can see in real time. So as you submit your invoices, it's just updated for them. And so, and they've shared with us that the trust that has been built, because there's now transparency between
That's
the budget.
kind of where I was going.
Yeah, and the engagement, right? So what they found is that the budget owners and the meeting owners are now way more engaged from the beginning of the process with the planner or the coordinator, and it's just changing the entire dynamic there. So that the transparency has been huge in elevating. And the other thing that the Apple Meetings team said is that they've become so much more valuable in the business because they're providing so much more value too, and the confidence and the trust has built. So it's just completely changed the game. So it goes to exactly what you're saying.
Great. That's great to hear. And that's what anyone's looking for in their job, is to be engaged, have someone trust you, not question every little thing you do. I mean, that's exactly why, in my opinion, the exhibiting community and the meetings community has the insecurity complex, is about the only thing I can think of to say that they do, and why they put this thing in this big roadblock in front. Oh, too much, don't have the time, don't have the ability, whatever it is, because they really don't feel trusted. They don't feel like people take them seriously. They don't feel like they're, even though they maybe have the number, like Elizabeth, you've got your CMP behind your name. A lot of the executives don't look at it and think expertise. Let
me jump in.
Unfortunate.
Jessica, I'm gonna call you out for a second. You've got a secret society that's operating in stealth mode. Do you not, in the industry?
I wouldn't call it secret society, no.
Well, it's we don't know who the members are. They're all frustrated with process and change, but yet nobody wants to expose themselves.
Well, I think that is about the company. As we talked about, Todd, that's about the company. It's not about the individual.
Well,
so
let's take it down to the individual level, though, because it's very important, right? I mean, Talia is about openness and transparency, and yet we've got a group that you're part of that isn't willing to come out in the open and make a stance. Is that a fair statement or not?
Only because they're not prepared. Give us another month. Give us another month. Give us, because I think we're finally in a place.
I'm just saying
where we can do that. The reason it had been, again, I'm going to go back to what I told you before, and that was confidential actually, but there were some threats against people, and people are with companies who are well known, and you cannot put your company in jeopardy.
Right.
So
well, look at Eric Schomburg. He's a perfect example. He took on some very big incumbents in the industry and paid a price for it, right, Eric?
Right, absolutely.
So, but I think this is what...
But you can't do that when you're part of a multinational company. No offense to Eric, because Eric has his own business. this is a person who was part of multinational company. And so it was not her place. And
one of the
so,
things that
but I really don't want to talk about that. Really, that's
no,
confidential.
I know. I don't want to go down this.
But what you're getting at, though, is some of those people I agreed. Some of them are stuck in the tradition of being, too much, don't have the time, don't have the whatever, blah, blah, blah. And so, and the others have for their own proprietary software programs with what they put that stuff into, and they do have a seat at the table. So it's interesting, the ones that do and the ones that don't, which are part of the conversation, part of this group. And that's where I struggle with, and we talk about it a lot, believe me.
Change is hard.
Change is hard for some people. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's not for Talia.
Yeah, Talia, you had a rejoinder in there. I didn't want to lose the opportunity for you.
I appreciate all the comments, and I think, sometimes when you can relate back up into something that's similar to, so for example, if you go into procurement and you can say, hey, there's a spend management solution out there for our category. Here's what it does for you. It allows you to help us maximize budget. You have transparency into the spend. You can bring to the table, your traditional procurement processes that have worked so well in the rest of this organization. And you can go to the CFO and say, wow, you know what, you guys do a great job in doing payments. And when we got to do credit cards or outsource it, that's just more work on me. And I can give you the transparency into these budgets at all times. Here's what's great for all of you guys. And then for me, you know what? I get to do my job better. I want to do it well. I want to be compliant, and I want to make the best events possible so I can bring the most value to this company. Here's a win-win-win for all. And as I built this, software, and I had the opportunity to make it purpose-built, I really thought about all of those stakeholders and making sure that it was really delivering what everyone needed, right? From the meeting owners to the finance team, to the procurement team, to the meeting creators and the event creators. And I think that, when you've got something like that, and you can talk that language, I think that could be really helpful. I would prefer to have the events teams coming up to procurement and finance saying, gosh, we've got a solution here. We have found we've had to go the other way, where we've had to really go to procurement and finance and say, hey, you want visibility into the spend. Here's how we can deliver it to you. And you know what? This is going to make the lives of your planners a lot easier. And then we got to go in and kind of work the whole change management and deal with any disruptors that are coming in and saying, no, we don't want that. We like our systems. This is why. And so we get to see a lot of that, of those protecting. And then, you know what? I also got to work with and see some awesome innovators, right? I look at Dell, I look at Apple, I look at Lilly, like these guys came out and said, and a lot of them on the event team, and said, hey, we get this, we want to do this, and helped us to build it. So I've gotten to see both.
So I'm gonna force myself into this perfect spot because I love this discussion. This touches on a couple of the key themes, Talia, that you wanted to bring out tonight, and so thank you for this great conversation, and Francesca and Todd and others. I think what helped expose the value of data, right? And Talia in particular, the mindset that is necessary, right, to put that data to use and to be open to transparency, right? And it's been interesting to explore, Francesca, with you and Eric and others, right? Sort of what, why is transparency viewed with such suspicion? And I think it comes down to sort of some normal human anthropology. And I'll use another one of my famous awkward segues. And then I want to get to some of the innovation that you've seen, Talia, because I got a couple bullets to get through, or I don't get my free ice cream from Todd, right? That's my compensation. Those are my KPIs. So the analogy is this. Anybody been to the Sears Tower? I think it's called the Willis Tower now in Chicago. Talia, you have, maybe, I'm sure, right?
Yep.
Up at the top, they got this thing now that juts out literally out the side of the building, and it's a glass bottom. It's a whole glass box. And it's not that big. I don't know what the dimensions are. Someone could look it up for me. But the idea is you step out onto this thing, and you're literally over open glass, right, looking down all the way to the city floor, the street 100 stories below. And the first time I did it, my brain wouldn't let my feet move. And I sat and I watched people like for a good 30 minutes before I made an effort. And you just see these amazing reactions, right? Of people like trying to sneak in the side or step in big. And your brain won't let you do it because your brain perceives that you're going to fall to your death, right? Some people got down on their hands and knees and crawled out. It's really a fascinating thing, right? And so it strikes me that the fear of transparency, right, is a lot like that. Once you take the leap and you're out there, it's not quite such a big deal. And it still gave me the heebie-jeebies, and I jumped off and ran away. But, it sort of was like, okay, brain resets. Talia, to your point, the brain resets, the mindset can reset, and now you can move forward in a different mode. So I'll just offer my cheesy segue as a way to get to, I think what you're talking about in terms of the bigger strategic picture is this now frees up this talent in an organization. You call them event creators, right? Not planners, not organizers, not some of these sort of tactical. I love that event creator. The implication is these people need time and focus to be creative, right? And why is that important? You mentioned that brands are going in a different direction, right? Because people today are choosing different things with their time and money, right? I won't give the game away, but tell us a little bit about that, those changing dynamics and why that's good for our industry.
Yeah, I think we're seeing, and I have, you mentioned 5 kids. Some of them are, a little bit older, and they talk about, how they're spending their money, and they're saying, we would prefer spend our money on experiences than things. And I said, so give me some examples. Oh, we'd prefer travel. We'd prefer go out to dinner than, buy a car or spend that much money on a house. And I think you're seeing that across. I gave the example of Restoration Hardware. There's one in Chicago where they literally built like the store into an experience of like almost this art, like going through like art museum, almost like it's just awesome the way you do it. And I talked about like, look what happened with Toys R Us that's now filed for bankruptcy. That could have been an amazing company. Yes, you could buy toys online so easily. But imagine how you could have interacted, right? Like FAO Schwartz used to be in New York, right? Yeah. Like we were so excited to go to a store like that, and you're there. And so those are just examples of how industries need to change. And you think about an event, right? All everybody wants is a captive. It's getting the attention of your customer, right? Like how do everyone's fighting for attention from the phones, the notifications, right? So you think of an event and you have a captive audience, right? Their whole focus is on you for a day or 2 days or 3 days. They're attending your sessions. You're communicating them in multiple different ways. There is nothing else like that. There is no, I don't know, maybe you guys have, I cannot think of anything else where you've got the captive audience of your customer or your employee or whatever it is that you've invited, and you can interact with them and put in front of them all of these different ways. You then want the opportunity to be creative, to think about how can you do that. So I love doing that also as a marketer, and I miss the days of my event company. And I remember doing a pharmaceutical launch, and it was just the reception. And I said, well, they were doing a drug launch, and it was for their salespeople. And I said, well, even into the feeling within the reception, how do we kind of, make them feel like the brand, right? And we did the colors, and we just did all kinds of, but that takes effort and time. It's not just let's execute to make sure the vendors show up and what they do and they get paid. So lots of fun, cool things that you can do when you have the chance to be creative and maximize your time you have with your customer or potential customer.
Oh, that's awesome. And I suspect the kids giving you this great insight, they might be in that millennial group we hear so much about, these strange alien life forms that behave so differently than the rest of us. But thank God, right? I mean, good for them. It's interesting when, you choose experiences over things. To me, what I took away from that is you choose experiences over debt, right? Because all those things, cars, homes, it's all just debt and stuff. You can't believe the stuff that's piled up in my office that I need to go through. And I'm like, why do I need all this stuff? What is all
but even I find myself and my friends also shifting. I think the more digital, the more we get hit with phones. Like let's take a break from our phones. Let's just sit across the table and talk to each other. It's not just those, yes, for the younger generation, but I think also just like we're just so inundated that we're just cherishing the human connection more than ever.
events fill that need in the modern marketing mix, which is now almost entirely digital, right? I mean, this is sort of the last bastion. You don't have the door-to-door Fuller Brushman anymore. Perhaps that's better. We'll leave the social commentary aside of strange men showing up doors, right, without an invitation.
But that's a great point. That's what that's how they used to sell. And think about that shifted, and we lost so much of that. And now, and the relationship you have with your salesperson, so that's who you bought from. And I actually think that's going to come back around. Not that they'll go door to door, but that you'll meet them at events.
That definitely a better safe space, right, than the front porch. Although here in Kennesaw, Georgia, we're all required to be armed. It's a local ordinance. I'm currently a conscientious objector, just in case people are curious. Nevertheless, there are places in the country that do have those laws on the books. But back to the point, I think that human connection is critical, right? We all wouldn't be here tonight and sharing ourselves on video, right, if we didn't find some value in this. I guarantee no one's here to listen to my cheesy banter. So there's got to be something. I know, everyone, it's great. So there's got to be something deeper, and that deeper connection, I think, is really important in the modern age. Yet, nevertheless, as Todd would, I think, be quick to remind us, every opportunity is digitally enabled. And Talia, these events, you almost can't have them anymore without the data and insight, because of the complexity of the modern event now, with all the moving parts and pieces. And we've got a lot of tech entrepreneurs on our group tonight here who have created specific pieces of technology to address different aspects of engagement, or front of the house, back of the house, and so forth. So it's very complex, the modern event, and it has to be digitally enabled. Isn't that true?
Absolutely. And I think there's just the right ways, right? It's this combination of where do you have the human interaction, where do you want to spend your time talking, and where can you just have these things automated for you. The other interesting thing, I mean, I'm fascinated by what goes on in event. I kind of think of ourselves in like the bucket of event commerce kind of side, the back end side of it. And then the attendee engagement to me is a fascinating area. And if I wasn't in that space, I would be in this, because just being able to put on tags, right, on the registration tags and the name tags, the RFID tags, so they know exactly where they went, what booth they went to, what events they attended, being able to survey right away. I mean, just think about what you can learn about a customer or your employee or whatever it is. It's just amazing to me.
Yeah, and you'd probably not be surprised to learn that the industry is also struggling with how to make really efficient use of all of those data sets as well, right? Even if they are capturing them, right? And in many cases, it's just because their software provider captures it. A lot of organizers or creatives and planners trying to figure out how to make sense of all of this, right? I got all this data now coming at me. Feels like another kind of a change management type of process, but there's got to be something more. You mentioned dashboards, right? How do you make all this stuff accessible, right, for people that are in the industry today? Because if we collectively want to drive adoption of new technology, of new ways of thinking, right, because of the data and insights that can be derived, from digitally enabled experiences. If we want to drive that broader industry-wide adoption, it strikes me that there needs to be more emphasis placed on what you described earlier, right? Which is finding these sort of killer app situations that really provoke the adoption, right? And then grow from there. I guess the question behind it is, how do we help people with this transition when things seem so overwhelming? There's so much that's asked of sort of the modern event creator.
Just to add to that question, an event normally would be a place where there's a huge branding aspect as well. So just looking at the ROI of a specific event, it also undermines that effect, because it's something personal. So it might not, maybe it undermines the effect that it could have on a person maybe 24 months from now. So how do we get a dashboard or something to either measure that, because that is literally not measurable. So it's kind of the same situation with social media. So what are you thinking around those lines as well?
Yeah, so I think, I think there's a lot of really great software solutions out there that are really focused on kind of all of that, as I kind of keep calling about, the denominator side of it. I've really focused on the numerator side of it, which is the cost side of it. And, one of the things, Steve, I would say is, and Francesca, you mentioned it, is the budget transparency throughout the process, that with the budget owner and the meeting owner, that will help to engage them all along the way, because they care about how their money's being spent. And the job of an event creator is to spend a budget in the best possible way. So if you have the transparency on a dashboard that says, this is where you're at, this is how much I spent, and some visibility into that, you're going to engage, right? And together you're going to help to create better events. To me, that's one area that, and of course, procurement cares about budgets, finance cares because they need to do accruals, right? There's all kinds of stuff that they all care for different reasons. So the budget, transparency into the budget in a dashboard, I would say would be one big one. The second would be, I think, around kind of the key metrics that a company has. Sometimes it's cost per attendee per day. Sometimes it's just what are the things that we're spending on, one division compared to another division, so we can benchmark. Benchmarking is really big because you really don't know so benchmarking internally and benchmarking externally. Yep. And so those are huge things, I think, for everyone. And so those are the areas that we focus on. And I think you set a different tone if like a CFO or a CPO feel like this category is not the wild, wild west, and it's not this big black hole, right? There's a very different approach that's taken to start. Now we could be strategic. How do we work together? How can we help you? So that's kind of where I think are the big things to happen first. And then from there, I think you've got all kinds of opportunities more on the marketer side.
Talia, quick thank you for that very much. And I love those keys to success that you've outlined. I took some notes. Hopefully I'll be able to read them tomorrow. It often looks like I was writing with my toes, which I know I'm not dexterous enough to do, but the outcome's the same nevertheless. A quick follow-up on Shivam's point. I'm curious, as you engage with maybe sales leadership at your clients, which you undoubtedly do, Shivam kind of talks about the long tail impact of events, right? And, you might not see that halo effect of that human-to-human engagement. Maybe it doesn't show up on a dashboard or a scorecard. Sort of the general question then is, are you seeing any changing mindset in sales leadership about the value of events? I think marketers get it, right? But how about the sales side? What do you see in their minds?
Well, I think it's still that gut feel, right? That, hey, I get to go to a conference and I meet with my customer and I'm able to build that relationship, and it's the best place. I even think of myself in sales. I go to a conference and I can hit 20 or 30 of my potential prospects as opposed to having to fly and meet each of them individually. Like, clearly that's obviously incredibly valuable. And of course we measure what an event conference does for us in terms of, the return that we spent on it. So I think sales always saw live events and conferences and trade shows as a great avenue to be able to spend and invest in. I think they needed to be able to prove that better, right? So they knew it because they're the ones on the ground, but they need to be able to prove it. And so hopefully, we can help to prove it. And I also, this is not something I'm going to be able to do alone. Again, being just one part of the equation, we're really looking to partner with companies that are really focused on the front end, that we can feed our spend data into them so that they can create a lot of reporting and analytics on the ROE. And we'll kind of really stay focused on making sure that we're providing the category, the procurement, the finance, and keep all those guys really happy, and then send our data up, forward to everyone else.
Awesome. We love that collaborative partnership mindset, right? And that ecosystem thinking, Talia, that you have. Because nobody can do it alone. Everything's too big to know, and there's too many moving parts. You can't build one system that does everything. So partnerships are really necessary, and I just love that mindset. And thank you for your insights kind of around the sales thinking as well. I think they're critical partners in all of this, right? And we all know of that ancient divide between sales and marketing organizations. So I think events have a role to play. You talk about bridging, Talia. There's a lot of bridging that you and your software and your thinking are doing, which is fantastic. We're getting close to the end of the formal time. As veterans of the show will know, we often slide into Oprah after the hours. If folks are willing to stay on, Talia, you're not obligated by any stretch. You've already given us 90 minutes. But there's two more questions I want to sneak in, Talia, if we can, even if we run a couple minutes over. Elizabeth, I would love for you to ask your question that you posted in the chat. That was a really thoughtful question, an area we haven't talked about in terms of some of these, maybe less hard costs, right? And how are we thinking about those when we think about return on events? Would you share that question with Talia, Elizabeth?
Sure. Hopefully it's not too loud here in my new WeWork office. So,
great. We can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So you were talking about kind of posing these tough questions to the industry about how we need to be more transparent, and I was remembering back in the days where we used to talk about sustainability in the same way, right? Either we've got to kind of regulate ourselves when it comes to sustainability, or we're going to be forced to do it. I was having these, kind of flashbacks, making that connection. And I think sustainability, like the environmental costs that we have, with an event, could be tracked, and some people are doing this, tracking it as a cost. So I wonder if you've ever kind of made that connection to your software, if that's a kind of an avenue that you would consider going down, being able to track environmental cost along with the financial cost in order to really get a better picture of the cost of an event. I guess
I'll tell you the one area that we've tracked is paper. So in one company that we worked with, they would hire a agency to work, and they had to send in binders of paper. So nothing was kept online. So the operators on site would be sent the whole box with all the binder, and then it would be sent back and then printed again and then sent to the reconciliation team. And then that would be put away in a storage cabinet, and they'd have like all of these different, storage areas for all this paper. And really with Evid, they completely eliminated it because it's all centralized. The meeting binder is kind of online. And so like the paper reduction, well, it was a cost and a huge environmental impact on paper. I would say that's the biggest one that I think from software can impact.
What about, have you ever thought, I've seen these carbon footprint calculators, right? Those were very popular for a while. Shipping a lot of paper and stuff, I know a lot of people are going digital with the event books, and mobile apps and so forth. Is that part of these equations, Talia, that you help your clients with? And I don't know, it's kind of an interesting area, right? Sort of the avoidance of impact in some sense.
It is, I guess, because there's so much waste right now and inefficiency in such big things right now that you could tackle, that they're kind of focused on, wow, we're paying 12% extra for somebody to pay our invoices for us, or, well, we've got 1,000 of the same supplier. Should we be using, 20 as opposed to 1,000, right? So the basics, I think, are still so much to uncover. That I think once we get through those, then there'll probably be more of interest in kind of looking at some of those other areas to impact.
It's sort of Maslow's hierarchy of waste, is it not? Right? You gotta get the big buckets first.
Start with bottled water.
Yeah.
Bottled water is a huge environmental waste. Yeah. It's a huge waste of costs, right?
Yeah.
So just start there.
Well, we could probably look at, start to produce some data of the cost, right? Because people, if they use our purchase order process, right, there's line items of exactly what they're ordering. So we get the data and we can say, how many bottles of water have been ordered. That's a good idea, actually. So, that's a really good idea.
Elizabeth, remember the Green Meetings Institute?
Yeah, I was just going to tell you, if you need any connections to those people that have kind of been fighting that good fight for a decade now, I'd be happy to connect you with those people that have all those tools already in place.
Yeah. Here's the rub on that. they were part of the 96. Now we're down to 95 because all these associations are consolidating because they have outdated business models, and they're still hoarding information, right? So the Green Meeting Institute and some of the great work of the Paul Salingers of the world is no longer readily available. Mm-hmm. Talia, I would challenge you, where do you go to find information, right? You've got this association that no longer exists. You've got the largest, as I just posted in the chat, the largest event on grass this weekend. It's the Waste Management Phoenix Open. It just happens to be a sporting event. Could be a conference. It could be a trade show. It doesn't matter. Where do you go to find the best practices and benchmarking for that gets 500,000 people over the course of 4 days? It's the largest event on the PGA Tour, and get some benchmarking and some insights and analytics to what Waste Management charges that organizer with, which happens to be the Thunderbirds, to make sure it's a zero impact event with that size and scope. Where do you go to find that information today?
Yeah, if you're asking me, I wouldn't know where to.
Yeah, there's where do you go?
We don't know. We don't have a place to go to know what we spend as an industry. You have guesses on that. So I want to solve that. That's my goal, is to try to be able to have, source of truth data to be able to understand what we spend, where we're spending it. And then I think that's right. Like, we're missing data. We cannot, tell our story or have the impact without the data.
Talia, you're going to be, I suspect, hitting the road and evangelizing some of this. Will these be some of the themes that you're going to be talking about as you ramp up some thought leadership activities in 2018? And are there any spots where we might see you speaking, or anything you can share with us at this point? I realize it's early in the year here.
Yeah, well, I actually am looking, to still look at my schedule at what the best places are. So I would love the feedback after hearing kind of what we're doing and what we're trying to evangelize from the group as to where you think it's best for myself. And, I have some great members of my team that are also, and then how do we extend the voice, right, about this? So we're not the only ones out there talking about that. It's a must-have. Spend management is a must-have for this category, not a nice-to-have. And so both of those would be really helpful.
Very good, folks. Any quick offers?
I'm posting on LinkedIn. That's my commitment, is to share a lot of thought leadership at least once a week on the various different topics.
I love it. I appreciate it, Talia. And Todd, you bring up a great point, and and Talia, you said it too about, there is nowhere to go get this data. And, even the industry statistics that I could rattle off to you, 24.5 billion in exhibitor direct spend, all these different, 40% overage charges, average price per square foot of booth. All of these are done by entities like SEER, Exhibitor Magazine, TSNN, all these, hand in the cookie jar type of organizations. And I have a funny story in going back to, Eric is the mouthpiece that will say anything at this point. And yeah, I've been, threatened by a whole slew of interesting folks that I could give a talk about. But, when I went to go meet with the two folks that run the Exhibitor Magazine up in Rochester, Minnesota, they told me, I said, hey guys, I've been going to exhibitor shows since I got in the industry in 2006. I've got this awesome solution, and we could roll it out at Exhibitor. It'll be ready by then. We'll have already beta tested with 2 small events. And they just laughed at me and said, oh, to be young and naive again. And Lee Knight, who runs Exhibitor, was, absolutely had a very similar idea to what a Ventrio does, but SaaS, cloud-based technology. And they told me, they said, Eric, if we solved everybody's problems, or if we had this solution, which is what, 90% of all seminars at the Exhibitor Show in Mandalay Bay every March talk about, we wouldn't have an event or a magazine anymore. So
see, that's exactly that fear thing that Talia was talking about. They're one of the old dinosaurs of change. I was going to say you could go into the mouth of the lion's den and go to Exhibitor Show at the end of February.
Well, it behooves. It's like some politicians, right, who don't want to solve problems because keeping the problem alive is how they keep their job,
what it is.
right? It's the huckster. So,
big money out of it.
how much inefficiency does that suck up out of the industry? Think of all the energy that floats around, some of these kind of models and operations. It's really sort of tragic. It's value destruction.
The thing is that I think again. Oh, sorry, Eric. Go ahead.
Talia, you're going about it in the best way possible, and I applaud you for the data that your company is going to have, even now, but in the next 3 to 5 years will be so important in terms of the metadata that reshapes this industry and what drives value and how people actually execute events. And it'll take these players, these archaic, good old boy network. It'll cut them down at the knees, and I, for one, welcome it.
Well, and hopefully it would change the conversation at a place like an exhibitor or something like that, to where you don't have to have the same old exhibiting 101 or drayage conversation. Sorry, I had to, Steve. Go to the drayage conversation and speak at the show, and instead it could be about some creative or innovative conversation, because everybody now has time to think about what their speech is going to be about, and they don't have to do the same old,
Right. Good point. Talia, just to let you in on the inside joke, we have a little drinking game around drayage. Whenever anyone mentions drayage, we drink, because it's the bane of our, why are we all being charged for this, right? The loading dock's right over there. I could move it myself if it weren't for this big burly union man preventing me from doing it. Anyway, all good topics. Talia, we've eaten 10 minutes extra time. We're so presumptuous, and I'm going to continue to be presumptuous for one more question, because I've got to get your answer on it. And it's our annual question, which is, I don't know why we call it that, Todd, because we've been using it for 3 years now, but maybe that's it. Maybe I answered my own question. Anyway, it's all about...
Because it's a beautiful question.
Well, maybe we should rebrand it. So the question is, what activity or thing or idea or concept or practice is ready for retirement in the live event industry?
Spreadsheets.
Woo-hoo! That's the phrase that pays. That's what I was hoping you were going to say. That's fantastic. I mean, I think there's a whole mentality around that way of thinking, right? And that needs to go with it. But thank you so much, Talia.
It was a lot of fun.
For joining us for 101 minutes. So you've gone over into triple digits. There's a separate wall of fame for that. It's really exciting. We got a whole wing we're going to be building. We don't, but we'll remember. And just really want to thank you, Talia, for sharing all of your perspectives with us. It's been a great conversation. Folks in the community, thank you all as well. Some super questions and really great dialogue. We appreciate your participation and contributions as always. And your time is so valuable to us, folks. We know you have choices on Wednesday night. There's even some good television programming these days. So we do appreciate you choosing to spend this time with us. It's really is the highlight of my week, and I enjoyed this particular episode thoroughly. So Talia Mashiach, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives, for being open with us. We love to part by asking how we might reach you. Folks may be inspired to want to connect and talk business opportunities. If you're open to that, how might we facilitate that post-program?
For sure. So my email is easy. It's talia@eved, E-V-E-D. And also I'm on LinkedIn. And so I've been really active. That could be another show where I've really, in the last 3 months, have really learned how to really maximize it.
Nice.
My kids are proud of me. I actually posted a funny travel video that some of my husband sent me, and I have 160,000 views of it. I was like, just posted something funny. But I was telling my kids, look how many, it's like 2,000 a minute are going. They're like, Mom, yeah.
Mom's pretty cool.
Like, you're so proud of that. I get that on Instagram like every day, right? Because I'm not really into the social media of other, the personal stuff. I like live connections. So LinkedIn is another great, and I will do my best to be able to connect. And I hope that all of you will help me be the voices here and for us to be able to transform the industry.
Thank you so much. We will do our part to support your efforts and connect. Thank you so much. It was a fantastic conversation, and we wish you well this year. Stay in touch. Todd, maybe we can get Talia access to Slack if she wants to pop in every now and then and drop us some notes about what she's up to. We've got folks everywhere, Talia. So we'll come back to you with some ideas on some good events and programs you may want to think about for thought leadership. And we look forward to seeing you out on the stump. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a great night, everybody. Thanks for being open. And watch your calendars. Another great program next week. So do hold the spot, and we'll see you here next week. Thanks, everybody.
All right, take care.
Take care. Bye. Bye.